Carlos Sainz will join McLaren for 2019. That is the big headline coming out of the world of Formula One today. Alonso is out the door. He's leaving Formula One at the end of the season, and this man, Carlos Sainz, Alonso's fellow Spaniard, will be replacing him at the team for the foreseeable future. No comment yet on how long his contract is. If I'm being honest, and I think we can all agree with this, it's going to be a 2-year deal. This will take him up to 2020, so then when 2021 comes around, the team can have a complete reshuffle for when all the new regulations come in. That's what McLaren have done here, and looking at the driver market, this was a deal that has been very much on the table for quite some time now. With Alonso departing, McLaren needs someone with not only experience, but talent. Someone where, if Van Dorn stays, if Norris comes in, someone who can lead that team. And arguably, neither Norris or Van Dorn, with their limited experience, could do that. And I think some of you will think, well, Sainz is only 23 years old, team leader, that's a little bit early, isn't it? Well, incredibly, even I didn't realise this, next year will be Sainz's 5th year in Formula One. He's almost a veteran, it feels like. He has had a pretty solid career, but at the moment it seems to be plateauing. And this deal for Sainz is fantastic. This is the perfect playing field to further his career and enhance his career. McLaren is a team which is going to be backed for a very long time. Yes, it's very likely that they're going to go to an Indy program. Yes, it's very likely that they're going to explore other avenues in motorsport. But Formula One will still be their pride and joy. And with all that money coming into the team, at some stage, they're going to overtake the likes of Force India, Toro Rosso, Sauber, teams that at the moment they're almost on a level with. Even Haas to a certain extent. McLaren have far vaster and better facilities than Haas F1 team. And so for Sainz, this is perfect. Yes, they're a customer team, and that always brings its issues. Sainz at the moment, if you didn't know, is at Renault. He's on loan from Red Bull, but at the end of the year, his contract runs out with Renault, his contract runs out with Red Bull, and is now, like I say, moving on to McLaren. McLaren has Renault engines in the back, so that dynamic, the Renault team versus McLaren, I think next year is really going to heat up, and I think those two teams, partnered with Red Bull, I think will be very, very close. So that's going to be interesting to see where Sainz is compared to the Red Bull. That really, for me, is the big bit of news here, because I think we all sort of expected Sainz to be in the McLaren, but also, did we expect him to be in the Red Bull? Well, that was the more of the 50-50, I believe. He didn't get the Red Bull, he would get the McLaren, and this screams Gasly has got the Red Bull seat. That is 100% confirmed pretty much now. And like I say, it's fantastic that Sainz has got him. I think Alonso's probably had some input in that. I do believe that. I think there must have been some... I mean, he's the best option for McLaren. I will put that out there. But I think Alonso's probably had a little bit of input, a few little nice words here and there to get his fellow Spaniard into that team. Before we move on to Gasly, I wanted to mention the teammate situation at McLaren. I quickly mentioned it earlier, but there's been no confirmation today who will be partnering Sainz at McLaren next year. Will it be Van Dorn? Will it be Norris? Will it be Ocon, Perez, someone a bit left of field? Well, I think with this deal, with Sainz coming in, this confirms that it will either be Stoffel Van Dorn or Lando Norris. This will all depend, I think, on the rest of the season for both of those drivers. I was a Stoffel Van Dorn fan last year, and a few of you definitely called me out in the Alonso retires video. It wasn't I'm Alonso hater. Everyone said I was an Alonso hater, definitely not. I don't think many people are Alonso haters, and I'm definitely not in that 1% of people that are. But I always had a little bit of a soft spot for Van Dorn because of what he did in the lower formulas, because of what he did in that first race, and I definitely thought being up against Fernando Alonso was a very tough task. And when you look at the comparison within lap times, qualifying times, between Alonso and all his different teammates, Stoffel, out of the whole of Alonso's career, Stoffel actually has the smallest gap between Alonso and the teammate. I mean, that counts for something, right? I know it's not everything, because race day, Alonso's far superior, and Alonso's other teammates are far superior. And this year as well, Stoffel's been awful. So the soft spot has definitely been shaved away this year. But I think he deserves another chance. And I think this because he needs to prove himself against another driver of his sort of age, of his sort of talent. And I think Sainz is that sort of character that can really build Van Dorn and mould him into a real professional, top quality racing driver. But he's got to do it now. He's got to do it next year. But also he's got to prove himself at the end of the season. Because if a retiring Alonso, by the time we get to Abu Dhabi, is still smashing Van Dorn, if Van Dorn still hasn't picked up any more points, and Lando Norris goes on to win the F2 Championship, then it's Norris's turn. I really believe that. Norris at the moment, some people I know will comment that Norris should be in this seat, but they haven't seen Formula 2. They're just sort of saying it because they like a new British driver in the sport, which is fine, and, you know, got no issue against that. However, Norris hasn't been incredible this year. He's been very, very good, but I don't think he's been quite on the levels of Charles Leclerc. I think he's been on similar levels to George Russell. I would happily say that. Russell has had 4 feature race wins, whereas Norris has the 1. But Norris has only had 2 races where he's not scored any points, which is very, very consistent, especially in a series like Formula 2. So that's going to be a real interesting dynamic to see who McLaren go with. And if I was going to put my money on it now, I would say Stoffel Van Dorn, just because the team will want that familiarity to be able to compare Sainz to an existing driver. And then for the following season, if Norris doesn't get a Toro Rosso seat, for example, if Norris is still waiting for that McLaren seat, Van Dorn is still underperforming, Norris can easily come in. Because I'm not even sure if Norris will win the Formula 2 Championship this year. It could very easily be George Russell. So that's a really interesting dynamic for this McLaren team, for Zak Brown. And something else to mention, De Ferran, the man who's currently running the McLaren team, who replaced Eric Boulier, well, his daughter, this is horrendous that I know this, but his daughter is dating Stoffel Van Dorn. I know this from Van Dorn's Instagram, alright? But that's another sort of social aspect, political aspect within the team that I think will definitely be looked at and taken into consideration. So Stoffel there, he's played an important part in maybe keeping his seat there by sorting that little relationship out there. But that's just something a little bit left of field that might play a small part. But I think at the end of the day, money talks in Formula 1, results talk in Formula 1. Stoffel's not getting them. So for me, that's got to be the clincher. If he gets his results, he's staying. If Norris gets his results and Van Dorn is mediocre, I think Norris is coming in. But like I say, if I was going to put my money on it, I'd say for next year, Sainz, Van Dorn. I think that's the safe option. I think that's the option McLaren will go with. Right, let's look at the other sort of implications this has on the rest of the transfer market. The big one being Red Bull. Mentioned earlier, the 2 drivers in contention for that Red Bull seat were Pierre Gasly and Carlos Sainz. Well, Carlos Sainz is out of the picture now. So how long is it going to be until Gasly is announced? It's got to be in the next couple of days, surely. He's been great this season. I'd happily announce that. And for me, he's been one of the more impressive drivers this year. Yes, he's gone under the radar sometimes, but as a general rule, I think he's done great things in a car which arguably is one of the backmarker teams. Yes, we know this year, and I know that'll anger some people, but this year we go to each weekend and teams are in different places all the time. Bahrain, that team were the 4th quickest. Germany, that team performed pretty mediocrely. Other tracks like Baku, not great. So Gasly has done a really good job, I think, and he's shone in that midfield. He deserves a chance at Red Bull. But is there any other sort of left field drivers that could slot into that team? Well, we know Alonso's not in the running anymore. Sainz isn't in the running. Ricciardo's obviously gone. Hamilton, Vettel, Bottas, Raikkonen all under contract. Ocon is an interesting one. And Perez is also an interesting one. And the reason I say this is because we know pretty surely, I'd say 80% that Lance Stroll will be in that Force India team next year. So one of those two drivers is out. Red Bull have a seat. Now, I will mention, I'm 100% convinced Gasly will be going in that seat, but it's always fun to speculate. It's always fun just to think about it, have a little discussion, and then at the end say, nah, waste of time. But let's think about it for 2 seconds. Ocon is a Mercedes driver, so it's unlikely that Honda would allow Ocon to come into that team, especially Red Bull, who in theory want to use this Honda engine to take them to world championships. I'm not convinced that will happen for the next few years, and I think they'll take a big step back next year. But I still don't think they'll want to help out Mercedes in any way, shape or form. I think Christian Horner, Dietrich Mateschitz will not allow that whatsoever. But say they did, that would be fantastic for Mercedes. And I think a lot of people would agree that would be fantastic for Esteban Ocon, a guy who's impressed in his first 2 seasons of Formula 1. He's coming up to 2 years completed in Formula 1 now, and he's in his 3rd season, well, his 2nd full season, but his 3rd season, and this has been his best season of his career. And arguably deserves a chance at the top, and arguably that Mercedes seat isn't going to be free until 2021. Will he want to stick around for the next couple of seasons in mediocre cars? Well, if Mercedes can get him in at Red Bull, Toro Rosso keep Gasly and Hartley for 1 more year, for Ocon that would be fantastic. And for Perez, the only reason I can see Perez is going in is because of his experience to help the team learn about the Honda engine. But I think with Adrian Newey on board and the Red Bull team, that shouldn't be an issue. And Verstappen himself, he might as well be one of the most experienced guys on the grid. He is great. I think we can all agree with that. But I think he's mature enough to lead a team now. I don't think he needs a driver like Perez. But if he had Ocon alongside him, who was a rival back in Formula 3, but I think would be fantastic to watch on the same team. That would be a really interesting dynamic for Formula 1. But I still think Gasly is going in that seat. Now Sainz is completely out of the picture. But if I'm being honest, just to round up this video, this is a fantastic transfer. I love this move. For McLaren, I love it because I think it's almost a fresh start. It's an Alonso 0.2. You know, he's not quite as quick. Well, he's nowhere near as quick as Alonso, we're going to assume. He's nowhere near as charismatic as Fernando Alonso as Carlos Sainz. But he has the potential to be both of those. If he's let out of his shell a little bit, if he's taken off those reins of Red Bull. Yes, McLaren, we know, are very strict as a team, but arguably might be a bit more loose in the fact that they're not a B team. Sainz, for the whole of his career, has been conditioned into trying to get into a Red Bull seat. Now we know that's not the case. Will we see a different Carlos Sainz next year? That's something I really just like to speculate about and just think about. And I hope we do. I hope we see a really resurgent, fresh and new Carlos Sainz, almost like the one we saw in the very first season of Formula 1. I'd love to see that. And at the beginning of last year, actually, he was very, very impressive. So I think for Carlos is the great move. For McLaren, this is a fantastic move. But now I think the bigger question is, who will be filling that other McLaren seat? And like I say, Van Dorn for me is the given, but depends all on how Norris finishes off this season. But I'd love to know what you think about that. I'd love to know in the comments who you think is going to be partnering Alonso at McLaren for next season. And I'd just love to know what you think about this deal in general. Do you love it or do you hate it? Because I'm definitely sure some of you guys out there will think this is a big step back for McLaren and their plans in the future. So I'd love to know what you guys think about that. Thank you for watching as always. If you're new around here, feel free to subscribe. We do F1 news, reviews and all that good stuff. But as always guys, thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.